This mini lecture today is going to talk about writing family stories. Family stories are the beginning of our next essay shape. Like the fable, family stories can grow into an entire essay that we'll call a narrative essay of abstract definition. So don't worry about that for now. For the moment, worry about this notion of family stories. People love to tell stories on each other. And your writing this week is going to be to tell me one and tell the rest of the class one. What I mean like family stories is I want you to think back to growing up. I want you to think about your parents and where they come from, and your grandparents and your aunts and your uncles and your cousins. And when you get together at Christmas or a birthday or a holiday or you know, one of the giant Eids, everyone sits around the table and starts telling stories on each other. There was the time. Especially parents and grandparents love to tell stories on your uncles. So at my family, every time we put up the Christmas tree, my father would tell me about the time the cat jumped up and pulled the tree down and broke my mother's favorite Christmas ornaments, and therefore, please wire your Christmas trees. Every single year. I mean, it happened for years and years and years. My Aunt Florence, every time she saw my brothers, she reminded us of the year they broke into the pig pen and almost died because they were little dumb city kids and they didn't know that pigs were really dangerous. And luckily, she saved them. And so the older they got, she just loved talking about how stupid they were. My brother Kent loves to tell the story of the time he saved my life. It's a stupid story. We were on vacation and we had 5 kids in our family car. They dropped us off. We all went to pee and they got back in the car and my brother and I were still peeing in the gas station, and my parents drove away from the gas station. They thought that we were just, messing around in the back of the station wagon, but in fact, we were still washing our hands. And we walked out of the gas station, we looked around and our mommy was gone. It was like, I was about 4. And my big brother, who was like 7, took charge. And the poor guy who ran the gas station, jumped in his pickup truck and ran down the road, desperate to get the people who'd left their kids. That was very funny. So he loves to tell the story about the time he saved my life when my parents tried to abandon me at the gas station. My dad has a story about my grandparents were so poor in the Depression that my grandmother made money by baking cakes. I don't know why he tells the story, but she was a great cook, evidently, and she baked cakes. So there's the cake baking story. I can go on and on and on, as you can. There are stories from family trips. There are stories from birthday parties. There are stories of disasters. The time my brother's hand got slammed in the car at the 4th of July fireworks. The story is a sad story, but my mom was very poor growing up, and she hates ivy, like Ivy League, ivy all over Yale campus. I think ivy's beautiful, but my mother just hates it. And I finally said, Mom, what is up with, why do you hate ivy so much? And she said, well, she told the whole story about when she was young, they got thrown out of their house. They couldn't come up with rent and they got evicted. And she came home and all of her belongings were on the sidewalk, and she was just terribly embarrassed that all the kids from school would see her, and they had to move into a dank, gross little basement apartment with ivy all over it. And so she always associated ivy with being poor and being embarrassed and being scared. So that's why my mom hates ivy. So interesting stories. I love stories about how parents got together, how they met. You might ask them if you have parents who are together. My grandfather loved to tell the story about courting my grandmother with reciting Tennyson poems. I mean, this was in the 1920s, so God bless him. And I hate Tennyson poems, but evidently it worked. He got the girl and got married, and years later, happily so. So how did your parents fall in love? How did they meet? What made her decide to say yes? Great question. So, for the purpose of this assignment, I want you to spend some time. You can use fluency writing if you want, or a scrap piece of paper, but I want you to spend a little time rummaging through your memory, rummaging through your head to come up with a list of 5, 10, 15 stories. They can be trivial, they can be funny, they can be scary, they can be grand. Stories that you have heard or that you can tell. And for this assignment, the older the better. So for this part, it's better that stories don't include you. So think about stories about other family members, older family members. I love stories about how you got to Connecticut from wherever. Many of our families come from different countries or different regions. Stories of a move are interesting. We moved one time in the winter. That was a great and a scary thing. Stories about really good times that family had and really scary times that families had. These are all stories that get passed down and are really useful fodder, really useful material for this next exercise. So I just jotted down a few of these little, I could tell the story about getting thrown. My dad loves to tell the story about my brothers getting thrown into jail. My brothers were protesters back in the civil rights riots of the 60s, and they got thrown into jail for protesting. These days, we've gone full circle, but my brothers were in jail. They were 6, 7, and 8, like the youngest ex-cons in the family, and I love that. And it's a great story. A story about incarcerating 6 and 7 and 8 years old, years before Black Lives Matter. So I have a list now: Christmas cat tree, brothers in the pig pen, getting left behind the gas station, baking cake, and brothers getting thrown in jail. So I have a list, and after I go through this list, I want you guys to have 1, this is 2, 3, 4, 5. I talked about my grandfather's getting together with my grandmother. That would be 6. I talked about my mother and the ivy. That would be 7. So I'm almost up to 10. I really want you to push till you have a list of 10. Then, after you have that list of 10, I want you to reread your list, and I want you to pick one that you really want to talk about. Ivy, I sort of told Tennyson. So I'm feeling political these days. So all the stories that I could tell, just for the moment, I'm feeling kind of political. Racial issues, racial inequities are back up in the cultural consciousness. So just for all the possible things I could write about, I'm going to choose for me the one that I want to tell about is this one about my brothers getting put in jail when they were 6 and 7 and 8 years old. So for this assignment, your first job is to make a list, and you're aiming for 10 in the list. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 10. The next step is to circle on your list the one that you want to talk about. By the way, your list can just be a couple words. It's a list to help you remember. It doesn't have to be full sentences at this point. So then, in your Google Doc, I'd like you to make a list, circle the one that you want to talk about, and then you're going to draw a list onto your list, and in your Google Doc, you're going to draw a nice little line. And then we'll take a deep breath. You're going to sit down, get your tea, get your mojo, get ready, and on your mark, get set, go. I want you to tell, this is the prison story of my brothers. And on your mark, get set, go. You're going to write it out in full. Well, it turns out it was during Good Friday and an Easter celebration of my father was a pastor. They were celebrating the Stations of the Cross. They went around praying to different people. So I got to give you the background of the story. The last stop of the Good Friday was in a suburb. We lived in a very white suburb, and there were black people and white people getting off a bus, and they started saying prayers, and then they took a snow cross, that fake snow spray that you have at Christmas time, and they were spraying crosses on stuff and saying prayers. And so the minute they did that, the white cops decided that they were defacing public property. And so they all came in. The cops were scared of all these black church ladies. We were singing like, we shall overcome and all that kumbaya stuff. And they swooped in and they grabbed everybody and they threw them all in jail. It was hysterical, singing and praying and so on and so forth. It was great excitement. They spent there all day. And my brother loves to tell about, he didn't care. It was great. He thought it was great fun because Mrs. Thompson was one of the black church ladies from downtown. And she just had as all black church ladies do, she had like a purse full of like little butterscotch candies. And she just kept on dosing butterscotch candies to my brothers, which they just thought was the best thing in the world. So most of us would be scared to be in prison. My brother was like thrilled because God bless Grandma Thompson and her butterscotch hard candies that got him through the longest incarceration of a 6-year-old's life. Notice as I'm telling you the story, I mean, it's a good story, but it has some parts. I had to tell you about the background. I had to tell you about what happened. I had to tell you about the graffiti. I had to tell you about butterscotch candies and Mrs. Thompson. As you're writing your version of a family story, you too are going to be mindful of the parts, the background, the names, the places that we need to know, all the details you can come up with, anything that we can see or smell or taste or touch. These are what make a story really strong. So here's your first try. You are to write first a list of 10 stories you could tell. After you've got 10 to choose from, circle the strongest, most interesting today and write it out in full. And you're aiming for 500 words, 2 pages of typewritten time. You're aiming for 4 paragraphs. All the space you need to tell a juicy story. All right. Good luck. This is a real writing. This is going to grow into our next essay, but we'll call it family story number 4. Let's call it number 4 because we have the 3 fables and this essay number 4. This is the beginning of your next essay shape. All right. Have a blast. See you next time.